Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is July 25th. Y'all, it's August next week. I don't know what's going on. And we're going to talk assistance for planners, consistency, transparency, and trust. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box. I'll do my best to answer those. For content questions related to the presentation, type them in the Q&A box. We'll get to those at the end of the slideshow presentation during the Q&A. It would help me out if you tell me in your question who you want, which panelist you want to answer the question, please. On your screen is a list of our sponsoring consortium members for 2025. Thanks to all those participating APA chapters and divisions for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by our friends over at the APA Technology Division. So thanks for bringing this session and many other sessions this year to our webcast series. You'll hear a little bit more about them in a moment. Coming up on your screen is a list of our August webcasts. You can register for these and all of our upcoming sessions on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. To log your AICP CMs, head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found again on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, and a weekly reminder of what's on tap. We record all of our sessions and we post them to our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube and type in Planning Webcast and we'll pop up along with our well over 500 session recordings, all available to you for free. So be sure to subscribe to our channel so you get notified when a new recording has been uploaded. Last thing, new this year, we have an email list. I send out an email one time a month at the top of each month. I promise it is only one time a month. And it's just a reminder email of what sessions are coming up and available for you to register for. So you can either scan the QR code or just head over to our website, and up at the very top, there's an option for you to subscribe to that email list. So never miss a thing. Again, if you have questions for our panelists, type them in the Q&A box. Don't raise your hand. We don't do sound or audio or video or anything. Just type your questions in and we'll get to them at the end. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you, David, to kick things off and introduce the division and all that jazz.
I am happy to do my quick introduction. Thank you, Christine. Oh, right. I think people can see my screen.
Looks good.
All right. Well, as Christine mentioned, I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves, but I'm very happy to be joined by representatives of Houseal Lavigne Associates and Rico to talk about assistance for planners today. And I just want to give a quick background on what the session will look like. We're going to discuss an introduction in the technology division quickly for about 5 minutes, and the resources that we have for folks on this call, and then go through assistance for structured process, and then assistance for plans and questions, and then a question and answer at the last 25 minutes of the presentation. And about the technology division, the technology division brings together planners with a collective interest in how technology can assist in planning, design, and the decision-making process. I'm sharing our website here so you can see links to our previous webinars, our dedicated GitHub repository, and other resources that we've been putting out in the world for planners to use as part of their work. And of course, I want to highlight our GitHub repository, our Urban and Regional Planning Resources repository, which won a Division Council Achievement Award for contribution to the profession. This resource is just a single link that we ask you to bookmark our bookmark. Whenever people see us at conferences, we hand out these little bookmarks with a QR code that has a link to this repo, and it just has hundreds of different data sources and vendors that might be useful for your planning projects. We've had previous webinars on generative AI, but also more recent webinars on web skill for planners, or even topics like model builder for planners and GitHub for planners and beyond, for planners that are interested in these applications and where it can aid their work. You can find them, the links on our page, or follow up with the planning web, and we're hoping that we'll include a few links as well to within the planning webcast description and when this is put on YouTube. As well, the technology division has been putting forward several different types of resources out for planners and publications. This includes a recent collaboration on ethics and generative AI with the ethics committee, but also includes our resources articles that take resources from our GitHub repository and make them available to planners in Planning Magazine through different articles, including one more recently on 3D modeling and urban design. And in terms of resources for our members, if you're interested, we're working on a technology planning handbook and a planning Black Mirror card game, which we've demoed successfully at a few conferences. And that includes the APA National Conference, where what we did was we tried to create a scenario planning and discussion game around how planners might address or build solutions in a very uncertain, strange, and strange world where different technology solutions rear their head in a kind of Black Mirror type of environment. So that's kind of one of the areas that we're trying to get this available to our members for those that are interested in using it in their own practice. And we're hoping will be a general resource for other divisions that are interested in exploring it as well. And that kind of brings me to what we're talking about today. There's a lot of considerations for using generative AI as part of our planning practice, many of which are listed on this slide. But as a profession, we're still learning about its applications and what role it can have in our practice more broadly. And the way that I see this presentation is we're kind of bringing together two very different approaches from a framework I'm borrowing from a report that is relatively recent from the Victoria Planning Council on AI. And there's a QR code to that report there if you're interested. But there are kind of these two approaches that we can think about for how technology can assist us in our approaches to planning. One being rules-based assistance in conventional automation, where predefined logic is used to perform repetitive tasks. This often depends on some type of way to convert zoning codes or similar types of structured codes into something that's machine readable that can fit into a structured evaluation process. And it has a little bit more clear control over that process. We can set up how we evaluate the conditions of success in a more clear way. But then there are some of emerging techniques, whether it's enabled by LLMs or other technologies, where they can deal with unstructured data and more ambiguity in ways that a more structured, rules-based approach can't do. And there can be shortcomings with that approach with conventional machine learning technologies, such as sometimes these systems and the way that they make decisions they're often statistical engines, and so the transparency in decision making can be difficult to uncover. There's less control theoretically over what the outputs of these processes are. And these outputs can require more review when just used when just taking them straight from a pure machine learned system. And so there are ways that you can build hybrids of these different approaches that kind of blend the benefits and of each approach. And some of that will be alluded to in this presentation. But more generally, this is a very interesting way to structure kind of the two presenters that we have coming to speak with us today, and the two different approaches that they take to these problems. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Foss from Rico to speak about what his company does. And Foss is somebody I met while attending a planning conference in New Zealand. And I'm very excited to have him present at a very unconventional time for him today about what Rico does. So with that, Foss, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. And just checking that you can hear me.
Yep.
Perfect. No, thank you very much. Yeah, as David mentions, joining in from New Zealand, so very early morning. It's just past 5 here. So please bear with me while the morning caffeine kicks in. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen and hope that that comes through. Is that coming through now, Christine?
Yep, looks great.
Awesome. So yeah, my talk today is going to be on technology, I guess more broadly, but it'll touch on those two types David briefly mentioned at the end of his presentation, of more kind of traditional rules-based technology being applied in planning decisions and assessments, and also looking at how AI is being applied to those processes too. So quick call for my agenda for my presentation today. I'm just going to start off speaking briefly about Rico and why we started it, and the kind of principles and philosophy that have gone behind our solution. Then I'm going to move into how Rico works, and I'm going to go through a few screenshots there and potentially just run through a little bit of a demo. And then finally, I'm going to look at applying AI to planning approvals and how we can kind of go about that in a way that respects the various practical considerations involved in the planning domain. Cool. So first, I thought I'd start off with some translations, perhaps more for my sake than anyone else's. I just had to make sure that when I'm speaking, given the New Zealand context, that everything's making sense to a US context. So there's a few basic things that ChatGPT brought to my attention before. It's that what we call a planning consultancy is a planning firm, district council, regional council, and local government. And I might use these terms in my presentation. So yeah, I hope they don't mislead you or confuse you at all. As a city government, municipality, county government, or local planning department. A resource consent over here, I believe you call a development approval. And the last one is more about how we speak in New Zealand more than anything, is we don't pronounce the R's at the end of our words. So whenever I say planner, please hear that as planner in a US context. Cool. So I wanted to jump into kind of starting with why we started Rico. Rico was essentially a response to complexity in planning. At least in the New Zealand context, we were observing that the planning, assessment, and decision-making process was becoming a lot more complicated. We kind of see two major trends leading to that. The first is that there's just more issues to manage in modern times. There's more pressure on the resources we have, such as need for housing and increase in density is a really big issue in New Zealand, where we're a relatively young country and population growth is still quite high. Also an increasing awareness of issues to be managed, whether they be environmental issues or societal issues. Kind of links to the third point, that there's also a growing body of knowledge to manage those issues. So there's more awareness of issues, and then there's a greater body of knowledge in terms of how we approach addressing them. As a kind of follow on from this, in the planning framework, so those are like the codes or the rules that are being used to govern these assessments and decision making. We've seen a shift from more narrative, holistic type assessments, which a lot more rely on the planner's discretion and can change quite a bit project to project, towards the plans themselves or the codes themselves are getting significantly longer as we seek to kind of have more structured and code-based evaluations. And so the plans are ultimately growing longer, getting a little bit more technical and also more prescriptive. So that's kind of the backdrop. So with Rico, I'm an engineer. I have had to have a big crash course in planning over the 6 years that we've run Rico. So we definitely take a system-focused approach where our technology is very much focused on the process that a planner goes through to conduct an assessment, as opposed to specifically telling you how to do an assessment. It's more the process and supporting along the way. Very early on in the piece, a key kind of thing that stood out from the planning industry, the customers we were talking to, was that it was very important to uphold the integrity of the planning processes in terms of not compromising on the quality of decision making or assessments. Ultimately, for a lot of people, it's both on the kind of municipality side or the council side in New Zealand, and the private sector consultancies or firms working to lodge applications and process them, is that it has a legal backdrop in New Zealand, and it's very important that the integrity of that process is upheld, or else it can create problems in a legal context. And finally, another big concern was that the technology needs to empower professionals, as opposed to kind of hiding away parts of the process or what's going on in the things that build up to a planning assessment or a planning decision. Really not looking to kind of hide that away or dumb it down, but more focus on technology that actually empowers professionals. And ultimately, all of those three things are needed in practice. They're almost not really a preference, but a necessity if we're really looking to kind of sustainably produce faster, clearer, and more consistent decisions. So with that, little bit of background on Rico. So Rico is actually a workflow-based software. Essentially what it's looking to do is to capture planning, assessment, and decision-making processes in a workflow. At the moment, in New Zealand at least, we find a lot of that process is captured in Word templates, mostly like Microsoft Word templates. People have report templates or guidance notes within their planning teams, and they will use those to kind of outline what their actual process is for doing an assessment or making a decision and producing a report. So the first step we do is we translate these from reports or from kind of institutional knowledge that exists within a planning team, and we put as much of that process and institutional knowledge as we can in a workflow. And so you can see on the left-hand side, we've got various steps of a workflow, performing an assessment of environmental effects here. It's got the various steps that you can scroll through. I will jump into the software briefly to kind of run through how that looks. And there's instructions on the steps about what the aim of the step is, the key considerations and recommended approach. And then finally, there's a text field to respond to all of this, where you can include things like templates for responding and structuring them. So a lot of this stuff is, as I say, institutional knowledge or knowledge from your planning team that people already have in templates and that kind of thing. We look to kind of capture that in a slightly different way in Rico and produce this here. Putting it into a workflow enables us to plug in various technical assessment components. The first of those is we integrate GIS information into these workflows. So in the New Zealand context, that's going to pull through just basic site information, information about the zoning, and also you can see on the top right here, figures, which depict various planning layers and overlays applied spatially to a site. The idea here is that this information is, one, made available for the planner to digest and put into their kind of internal thinking about just kind of getting an understanding of the site or wherever their proposal's located. The next technical assessment component is a rules or a full plan assessment or full code assessment. We take plans in whatever form they're in. In New Zealand, it's very variable what form the plans or the codes are in. Some of them are in PDF documents. Some of them are in HTML, like web pages. We aim to create a digital assessment process where you can go through those planning rules and provisions and assess them. And so you can see on the left here, you can select development classifications or activity types, we call them, which this one's got the establishment of a vehicle crossing. It aims to capture what you're doing, and all the related rules kind of laid out for that development classification in the plan are also brought in where you can assess them. Ultimately, this is kind of producing automated tables like this on the right here, where the planner's input is in this right-hand column. So you're just saying what you're complying with, where you infringe or comply or don't comply, and it's building this table for you as you go with your technical assessments and comments on the right there. So you can start to see this mix, I guess, of where the software is automating bits and pieces and where there's still room for planner discretion and planner control over the process, both in terms of what rules and things it's bringing in and in terms of what you're going to say about them and your kind of assessment of them. The last thing is that all the information that you're putting into a Rico workflow while you're using it, so both the rules assessment side, like what you've assessed, what rules you've assessed, what you've said about them, site information, and your qualitative assessments you might write in the text fields, those are all being saved into a database as you go and organized. So these projects on the left-hand side here, whenever I come to say, write like a description of the proposal or a description of the site or provide any kind of qualitative assessment, you'll be able to see a library of your existing responses and choose any content from those you'd like to pull into the new job. This is kind of a key data source in terms of later on with AI, is having all of your previous assessment data organized so that it can be used by technology in various ways. I'm going to briefly drop out of the presentation and just jump into Rico's app, just to give you a bit to tie all of that together. So this is a Rico project here. We're in a workflow where I'm just jumping around here, but basically the idea is you can enter a site name. I've got one prepared earlier here, our office address over in Auckland, New Zealand. It's pulled through the relevant data about the site, about the zoning, various aerial images here, and information that might be relevant to a planning assessment. Flooding's a big one in Auckland. We also have volcanic view shafts, another kind of quite big issue in Auckland to be managed. And the plan assessment is here, where we've got the rules, matters, assessment criteria. These words probably don't translate to an American context, but essentially the rules you either comply or don't comply with. And And then we've got the provisions that guide your assessment process and decision making. So you can come through and scroll through and add relevant development kind of classifications. And you can also assess if there's assessment criteria for those. We have them as well, and you can add them. We do tend to break these processes up into two parts. Like the first part is generally what we call like an underlying technical assessment. So the technical assessment is really kind of a little bit of the nitty-gritty detail. In New Zealand, there's a tendency where more senior planners tend to, dealing with familiar applications, tend to know what the issues are going to be already. And this step is kind of breezed through a bit more quickly. But certainly for people who are new to a certain type of proposal or a more junior level planner, this really lays out all the steps in thinking, turning your attention to what the proposal complies with, which provisions within the code it triggers and that need to be assessed, and then you're able to assess them. This information can then all be included in reports. So behind the scenes, Rico is producing a report, which you can see on the right-hand side, which can be downloaded into a Word document. With the site and surrounding environment section, we have templates, so you can either import a template from an old job here. I could go and find a job and import a template from it, or you're able to preload kind of favorite templates in. So I've got a default template here and I can import that. It's pulling through all the site information and details and like a template here. And then whoever's completing this can go through and edit it a lot like a Word document kind of functionality here. There's various kind of smarter functionalities within this. One functionality we do have is that you can insert any of the code assessment that you might do. You're able to insert that into these report sections. So in New Zealand, we have like a reasons for consent, or because it's a resource consent, which would be like the reasons why you're applying for a development approval. You're able to insert what you've done in the technical assessment into the report. So if I insert that I've added a reason for consent, it's going to pull through that information that I added up here and my assessment of that. And so I'll just write my assessment of why I trigger this rule. And that's going to be pulled through into the report here. And if I scroll down or jump down to where that is in the report, you'll see it's pulled a table in. So really Rico's trying to streamline the template building first, just pulling in any of that, the incorporation of any kind of technical assessment against rules or provisions from the plan or code, and also the site information. Anything from the GIS that we pull can be inserted into the report. You can see a table of basic site data here. You can also use it to insert things like any images that we've pulled from the GIS too. So I could pull through an image of the zoning here, or of an aerial image of the site here. So those can all be inserted into your report quite seamlessly. Cool. Happy to take any more questions on that, but I'll jump back into the slideshow. So the third part is applying AI to, number one, in our case, Rico, but more generally for this presentation, planning decisions and approvals. I guess there's been, in New Zealand at least, and I imagine in the States too, a lot of hype and talk about AI and what it can do. And it's an area where we've really thought hard about how should AI be applied. I think going back to the philosophy at the beginning, really thinking about a successful application of AI is one that takes into consideration all of those practical elements of that need to be considered when doing these planning assessments and decision making. A few key ones of those is who is responsible for a professional opinion or decision. that's like the first most basic one is at a simple level, if you use AI to make a decision for you and it's wrong or incorrect or contested, the responsibility is going to fall back on the person who authored that. So it's important that that person feels they can be responsible and can maintain that. The second kind of question was, what will their relationship with technology look like? And for me, that's a really important one is how they relate to the technology, like what the technology does, what it doesn't do, what you do, and so on. And the third was, with respect to those practical considerations, we also want to optimize here so that we can improve the productivity and the faster, clearer, and more consistent planning decisions as well. So it's balancing those, wanting to have, I guess, faster, but also balancing them with the practical considerations that need to be addressed. And to that end, we organize the solution space, or just when we're evaluating AI applications, we really think about three key elements. The first element is data, and that's just basic information required to make a decision. The second element is structure. So that's how you approach a planning assessment process, like how you'd structure the workflow, what instructions you'd put in the workflow, like how your knowledge is captured in there. And the third is the interface, and that's what deals with the relationship between me, the human using the technology, and the technology itself. We're working together to kind of make a decision or produce a report. Zooming into each of those individually and starting with data, there's a big element of that. If an old saying is like garbage in, garbage out. The better data you feed into the process, it can both improve the AI outputs. So the AI is obviously relies on what information is being fed to it to perform a certain task. And it's actually very similar to humans in a way, where the better guidance you're giving to your junior planners or planners in your team about how something is to be done, the better it can be done. And at the moment, the process for inputting data into AI models is quite manual and cumbersome, or the data is just not in suitable formats. So, I mean, no one's going to copy and paste, or few people will copy paste a whole plan into ChatGPT to ask it questions about it. So getting all that data into these LLMs and interacting with these LLMs. So I'm talking about data like machine-readable plans or site data from the GIS. It's quite cumbersome to get that into AI if you're kind of using ChatGPT to help you. So that's one area we look for Rico to improve things. Is we want to make quality data, and that's a really big thing. Is formats are becoming a big barrier to good results in LLMs. Is getting that data into the LLM so that it's in a clear format where it can be read by the model. So honestly, a big part about what Rico's doing for our customers is taking existing data sources, which might be plans or GIS, and putting them into a format where they're available on call to these AI LLMs to perform various tasks, like help me to write a site description based on the site data you saw on the site page, or help me to write a description of the proposal based on the rules that I have assessed for my proposal. Those sorts of tasks. The second one is the structure. Within an organization, a planning firm, like in the private sector or in a council or municipality, a lot of the teams tend to have very experienced senior staff, and over time there's a lot of kind of knowledge built up even in that team. And so a really important part is that information or that institutional knowledge is applied across the team. And at the moment, people are kind of writing Word templates with instructions about how to do things, or documenting processes in various ways. But a big kind of barrier is getting that knowledge into the actual workflows for people doing planning assessments and decisions so that it can be applied effectively, as opposed to kind of communicating it in ad hoc ways. And the next thing I'd add there is intellectual property as well. All of the past assessments are currently in Word documents or PDFs here and there, and people have to spend a lot of time kind of searching through those to kind of get examples of how they might assess this or someone else has assessed this. So the intellectual property of the team is being under-leveraged in that way as it's kind of siloed across various areas. So the structure of Rico there is really aiming at organizing all of this information and a lot of metadata as well, of being like, this is an instruction we write for a site description of how it's to be written. These are all my past projects, what I've written for a site description or something like that. All of that data is kind of structured into this format and tagged with metadata so that the AI knows what it is. And that again makes it readily available to the AI model. Like if we're integrating OpenAI into Rico, it makes all of that readily available to kind of use as it's being performing tasks, and again, increasing the accuracy of the results that we're able to produce with your institutional knowledge and IP. And I guess a important related consideration to that is privacy. We've also had to do that in terms of ring fencing your own data for your own benefit, and being quite careful around that. Happy to talk to that too a little bit further in Q&A. The last thing is the interface. And so this is really, I guess, more of a convenience type factor. I mean, a good example is like the iPhone, where it's got a single touchscreen display, and how it made it so much easier to interact with websites on your phone and other kind of functionalities on the phone. It was the interface that really opened up all of this technology as things like mobile internet became far more popular. It really just greased the tracks for people being able to interact with that. And so in that way, the interface, the human technology relationship is going to be very important. And the reason is because human judgment and planning plays such a central role in making good decisions and good assessments. So what we're seeing, and the audience might have seen various examples of this, is that overly technology-centric solutions tend to provide users like limited transparency and control over decisions being made and how outputs are formatted. It's very much kind of rigid at the moment and can be a little bit opaque and not clear what's actually being done by the technology. And ultimately, humanities-based industries like planning and law have really lagged more STEM-based industries like software being the biggest one, where these technologies are adopted much more widely. And a big reason is because the interface of them is very technology-centric and hasn't gone to the extent of empathizing with what the planner needs to support their judgment along the way and to kind of interact with the technology. And so the big question we want to ask there is, what if the technology made you smarter? It's so often not the case. Too often it kind of dumbs it down and reduces the human element. But with planning, because humans are accountable for decisions, that's not really an option. We need to ensure that the quality of the judgment is at least maintained and hopefully improved. And so that's really the aim of when we're designing our interface. We really want to make it clear what logic is being built in a given assessment or a decision. What are the reasoning for it? And that isn't hidden from the planner or made less clear. And also that whether it be your team and their unique approach, you have the freedom to have your own approach to things. Like in New Zealand, we see pretty much every team takes a slightly different approach for one reason or another, given they might deal with different types of projects, usually different level of experience within the team. Even catering to things like that is really important at a practical level to drive adoption. So ultimately what we're aiming for there is a tool for empowering planning professionals. And the results in New Zealand, I've put a very flattering image of New Zealand in there, down in the South Island, where Rico is actually being used in the regional council there, which deals with more kind of issues around farming and like forestry, those sorts of issues, and water takes, groundwater are big, so less kind of urban kind of considerations. Is the planners using Rico are more confident in their decisions because they actually have had a bit more rigor applied to those technical assessments and underlying understanding. The decisions are better aligned with the due process, the actual process laid out for that a decision needs to follow by the regulatory framework. And ultimately that confidence and understanding is a key thing in what's driving planners being able to make more decisions and produce more consistent outputs. So final thoughts. I thought that just like a few key things we're seeing is AI is, with these LLMs, we're kind of seeing the raw technology, and it's transitioning from that to more human adoption, which is integrating these practical considerations about me as a human being wanting to use this technology to do something, and being the way I am, what do I need to make the technology work in the way that I want? We're really excited about shaping how it's fitting into the planning profession meaningfully, so that bringing out all of those things of really looking to improve judgment and really bring the judgment to center stage, as opposed to kind of obfuscating it and making it less clear. And ultimately our mission there is just faster, clearer, and more consistent planning decisions. The real key relationship there is that we've found is faster is simply not automating more. It really is making things clearer and more consistent and more thorough. It's one of those real slow down to speed up kind of ideas, that the better we nail the basics, the better we do in terms of speed, which is often kind of the first thing people want. Awesome. So I'll round off my presentation there and pass back to either Christine or David. I believe Rob is speaking up next. I'm not sure if Rob's going to jump straight in or not.
Let's have Rob jump straight in and we'll hear about Euclid. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Rob Stouter, and I work at Houseal Lavigne. I help them out with their solutions development. So Houseal Lavigne is a planning services firm. We're headquartered in Chicago. We have some satellite offices in Milwaukee, Helena, Montana, Los Angeles, and Seattle, where I am. We've worked in 32 states across the country. We've also worked overseas some. We specialize in urban and community planning. We have a very strong zoning and development regulation practice. We do things like comprehensive master plans, corridor plans, zoning regulatory controls, neighborhood sub-area plans. We also have a service line around geospatial work that includes digital twins. And for the last few years, we've also been working quite a bit with AI, especially generative AI. And I get probably at this point, you're asking yourself, why are you looking at a picture of a giant chicken, especially, and let's be honest, a pretty poorly rendered generative AI chicken. And that's because, let's say you as a property owner, a homeowner, you want to have chickens in your backyard, or you want to have beehives, or maybe you want to remove some trees from your property, or perhaps you want to add on to your house, you want to build an addition. Maybe you're a business owner and you want to have one of these triangular, sidewalk signs in front of your business. Very important way of kind of getting traffic off the street into your business. All of that stuff is going to be regulated and stipulated by your municipal zoning ordinance. Maybe your city needs to add affordable housing, or just housing in general. Maybe your city is looking at adaptive reuse of some legacy or older structures. Again, all of those things are going to be regulated, kind of spelled out in the municipal zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan or both? How would you know where to start looking for information on that stuff? Say you're a resident, a business owner, property developer, maybe even city staff or city leadership. Where would you know to look? If you're like me, you would have no idea. Now, some of this stuff is online. You might also have a planning and zoning counter at your city, or maybe people call in, but these places are not always open. I've been working recently with a county south of Seattle, and they have 2 people working a front counter from 8 to 2 Monday through Friday. 2 people. Not only that, like, what if you can't get there after 2? I couldn't get there after, before 2 o'clock. That's why we created Euclid. Now, what Euclid is an AI-powered planning and zoning assistant. It's meant for developers, business owners, residents, city staff, people who have to interact with important planning and zoning documents. Now, we start out by giving Euclid an address. By the way, we're looking at Chattanooga. We've been working recently quite a bit with Chattanooga on setting up Euclid for them. We give it an address, and it comes back with us. First of all, it geocoded the address, it updated the map. It comes back with some information about this area. First of all, that it's zoned RN15, and that designation is part of the residential zones of Chattanooga with some goals around the neighborhood. Now, if you have worked with a large language model, something maybe like ChatGPT or maybe Gemini, you know that they love context, right? They want to know what the subject matter is that you're talking about. So with Euclid, we give it an address, and thereby we establish its context through zoning. So I'm going to ask it another question. I'm going to ask it about, can I build a granny flat on my property? Now, I could have said, can I build an accessory dwelling unit or an additional dwelling unit, something like that on my property? But I chose granny flat because not everybody knows what an ADU is, right? A lot of people call these things granny flats, or maybe they call them mother-in-laws or pool houses, something like that. And this is a great use of generative AI, in particular here with Euclid and planning, is that we allow the AI to interpret or to understand the meaning of language. So in other words, it's able to take granny flat and decode it as an accessory dwelling unit. Now, by the way, it says, yes, you can do that here. The use is permitted in this district. There's some additional regulations around lot size and things like that, setbacks as well. Incidentally, Euclid is also given access to some documents. So if it feels like, or if it understands that there might be some supporting documents that would help this answer, it returns those as well. All right, so let's ask it another question here. Let's give it the chickens question, because that's where we started. So we'll see if we're allowed to do this in this area again, RN15, and it says it's not allowed under the current zoning regulations. The keeping of livestock, including chickens, is only permitted in some of these other districts, including A1A, which, by the way, happens to be an agricultural district. So let's say I'm a resident, I'm a parent, maybe my kids want to have chickens. If I live here, instead of me calling the city or maybe going to the planning and zoning desk, the front desk, or maybe me looking through the PDF with Euclid, I can just really quickly get an answer, and that's good enough certainly to answer this question, or maybe it gives me enough information to kind of follow up at a later date with the city. Okay, let's do this. Let's switch over to, let's say I'm a business owner. And what I want to do is I want to open a daycare in Fort Wood. Now, let me just tell you right off, Euclid or the AI doesn't know what Fort Wood is. Fort Wood happens to be a neighborhood. So what the AI can do, or in this case, Euclid can do, is determine that based on this question, this is probably a neighborhood. So it begins by searching through some data. It figures out that this is a neighborhood. It zooms the map to the location, and then it filters the map to only those parcels in Fort Wood in which I could run a daycare. So it comes back and says, yes, you can open a daycare in these zoning districts, which are in this neighborhood. And then very curiously, it comes back with, there are really 3 types of daycares. There's a daycare home with 8 or fewer children or adults. There's a daycare home with 9 or more children and adults. And then there's a daycare center. So what I can do is say, well, first of all, point out that it also found some graphics here. Now, when I first asked this question, I was a little confused as to why it decided to pick this graphic. And again, that is because of the daycare home. So what Euclid does is when it answers a question, before it finishes answering the question, is it evaluates its answer. And one of those evaluation criteria is, do I have geospatial data for this? Can I update a map? It also looks for graphics. Is there a graphic that might support this answer? In this case, it found a single unit detached dwelling house. And then it found some other documents, and it came back with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it a follow-up question here, which is, what's the difference between this daycare center and this daycare home? Now, remember, it came back and said there's basically 3 types of daycares in this area. This is, again, a really neat usage of the AI. What I have done is actually asked it to compare 2 parts of the comprehensive plan or the zoning code. In this case, it's the zoning code. And it gives me this answer basically saying, hey, the big difference is that you're limited by, a home, the number of adults, or is it a dedicated facility, right? So obviously a daycare center allows you to open up a place that's 24-hour day protective setting, in larger areas and like industrial or commercial uses. It also came back with some images, some graphics to kind of illustrate its answer. And then it also found this online code reference. Now, what we do is we actually take the zoning code, we take the comprehensive plan, we load it into a special database, and in that process of ingestion, we allow it to retain its source information. So in this case, its source information happened to come from Unicode. So if Euclid decides that an external link would supplement its answer, it will return that as well. Okay, let's finish up this section with one more question here. And it is, which one is more difficult to open? Again, this is kind of an intriguing question to ask an AI. What we're asking it to do is to evaluate how you open up one of these types of centers and then make a decision about which one it would perceive to be more difficult to open. So let's check it out here. It says a daycare center is generally more difficult than a daycare home in terms of zoning and regulations and permits. Because they face a more complex regulatory requirement, location restrictions, and it believes that that would make it more difficult to open. So again, what I've just done, let's say I'm a business owner with a couple of questions. I have a good idea of where I could engage in this activity, and even more specifically, which type of daycare center I could open. Okay, let's move on here. I haven't talked much about comprehensive planning, so let's hit some questions on that. Now, first of all, Euclid, really any AI, they don't know exactly, like it doesn't really know much about comprehensive plans or zoning. What it does know how to do is interpret a question and then direct it to a data source. Now, what we do is we limit what it can consult. So if you know anything about generative AI, you know they have these things, they call it a corpus or it's training data. We actually block it from accessing that information to answer a question, but we do allow it to understand the semantics or the meaning of a question. And based on that meaning, it will direct it to a specific data source. So I ask it about this. How will the city handle flooding and which actions will it take to mitigate it? It's right along the Tennessee River there, so flooding is a big concern in this area. So Euclid comes back with a pretty neat answer here. Let's take a look at it. It's going to do things like development standards to control land disturbance, stormwater fees, prioritizing development in areas with existing or planned infrastructure, investing in things like rain gardens, green infrastructure, porous pavement, kind of an interesting mix of approaches, right? regulating development of karst limestone features to protect water quality, things like that. So it gives us a nice answer clearly out of the comprehensive plan. And then it follows up with some follow-up questions. Maybe I really don't know what a good follow-up question for this would be. So it helps me kind of proceed in my line of inquiry. By the way, you'll notice that it updated the map. Again, Euclid, when it answers a question, it evaluates that response. It looks for certain terms, it looks for certain words, and then based on that, it's going to take an action. In this case, it reached into ArcGIS Online. It has access, in this case, to the Chattanooga ArcGIS Online. It found this map, which is actually based on FEMA flooding data. You can see over here in the legend that this area of cyan or kind of light blue is a 1% annual chance flood. The hatching is a regulated floodway. So this gives us an idea not only of how Chattanooga is going to handle flooding or mitigate flooding, but also gives us a nice map to understand where the areas of concern might be along the river and including inland. Okay, now I'm going to ask it another question. I mentioned a few minutes ago that, or maybe I didn't mention it, Esri in a recent, in their kind of international user conference, they showed Euclid in their plenary session. It was super exciting. A lot of this work we did here, we did it for that show. This is one of the questions they asked. What are the city's current planning projects? Actually, they asked it a little differently, but the idea was to show that Euclid can actually also report on current projects. A very important project here for Chattanooga is the construction of this Erlanger Park Stadium. It's supposed to open in the 2026 season. It's envisioned as the catalyst for the first phase of South Broad revitalization. This is actually a plan. It's going to generate about $300 million in economic development. They gave us a nice 3D model. Euclid, in addition to finding maps and finding data and documents, can also find web scenes, these 3D web scenes. And if you configure them with things like bookmarks or slides, you can actually take a nice tour here and see, take a look at the stadium from the outfield here. It's got some nice grass, Lookout Mountain in the background. Anyways, the idea here is that the city has invested in these assets. Maybe they're BIM data. Maybe in this case, it's a 3D asset. It's GIS. You can use all of that stuff in Euclid just by giving it access to it and applying some metadata. Okay, we get asked frequently, what does it do when it doesn't know how to respond to a question? So I'm going to show a couple of examples of this. When is National Pizza Day? Now, obviously, this is not something we want people asking an AI, especially an AI centered around planning and zoning. So what Euclid does is when it detects a question that it doesn't want to answer, or it's not supposed to answer, we control the system with a series of software tools, including prompts. So it knows. It has to evaluate the question, and it knows it has some criteria that it's going to use to reject a question. So it rejects this. It says, hey, I can't answer this question. I'm here to help with planning and zoning for Chattanooga. Here are some examples of things I can answer on. Would you mind rephrasing your question? Now, what you can do with Euclid is you can actually customize through a configuration tool this answer. So if you want to direct people to, say, a resource at the city, you could add that. Maybe that's someone's email address. Maybe it's a URL. Okay, let's ask it another question. Now, there are times when it cannot find the answer, say, in the comprehensive plan or the zoning code for whatever reason, right? Maybe it's not enumerated in that location of the code. Maybe it was never added. For whatever reason, it's missing. So in those cases, it's going to take I don't want to say a guess, but it's going to try to answer the question and then come back with some information here. I was unable to find the specific maximum fence height allowed in the RN15 zoning district at this property. Again, when we go through this kind of rejection mode or fallback mode, we can customize that message to say, hey, why don't you contact the city at this number, or, these are their business hours or something like that. Okay, let's jump over to another city here. And that is Canyon City. So this Canyon City is another town we've been working with. They've been using this app kind of internally for about a year. And again, I'm going to talk about comprehensive planning here. So let's see. Does the city have plans for affordable housing? Canyon City is not a big place. They still have issues with affordable housing. So obviously they've spelled out some plans in their comprehensive plan. They're moving forward with some other actions to kind of ensure that there's an adequate amount of affordable housing in the city. They're actually looking at accessory dwelling units as well. So here's Euclid's response. It comes back and says it recognizes the lack of attainable housing. So again, Euclid was able to detect that affordable housing, its meaning in the Canyon City plan is attainable housing. It emphasizes the need to increase the stock of attainable housing. It's doing this through incentives, density bonuses, expedited processing, and then it actually calls out where it found this information. Now, we want Euclid to be transparent. We want people to trust it. And the way we do that is by having it cite its sources. So we tell it, hey, whenever you answer a question, you've got to tell us where you found that question. Chapter 4A, housing in neighborhoods, and the zoning code, it will actually tell you which section in the zoning code it found it. Okay, let me ask another question here. I'm going to ask about this neighborhood called Downtown and Riverfront. That's right over here. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, it updated the map. It reached into ArcGIS Online and looked for, based on its response, found a map that it thought would be most relevant to its answer. That happened to be a housing and neighborhood map. You can see its legend right here. The dark blue or the darker blue is new residential growth. Anyways, right down here in the middle of the city, let's see what it loaded. Oh, it found it. This time it picked an economic development map. You could see here, this downtown and riverfront, this is a neighborhood. They do things like have kayak races. There's breweries, there's restaurants. It's a real nice place. Anyways, it gives us a response. And in here somewhere, it's going to indicate that they want to encourage mixed use development, right? That feature multifamily components, increase the customer base, strengthen the, enhance the sense of activity in these areas, emphasizing the importance of attracting residents. Again, it cites where it found this. So let's keep asking this question here. I'm using keyboard shortcuts, by the way. Okay. What are the rules for mixed use development in this downtown and riverfront area? Again, I'm calling out a specific location, right? Because I want Euclid to only tell me about this area. Okay, I'm going to digress here for a moment. Now, one problem that a lot of you have probably run into if you use things like ChatGPT or Gemini or other generative AI tools is that they tend to do this thing called hallucination. You could call it maybe a statistical mistake or interpolation mistake. Anyways, what they will do is they will kind of confidently answer a question either with the wrong context or with different data. An example is, and Foss talked about this, if you take a document, maybe a planning document, and you upload it to ChatGPT and begin to dialogue with it, you might actually be getting information about a completely different city. We do not allow that. We block it from hallucinating. And the way we do that is we restrict its data source to your document. So Euclid, every instance of Euclid is specific to your specific community. So in other words, it's not going to answer questions about any other community other than Canyon City. Okay, let's take a look at this answer. So Euclid figured out that this was a zoning question. So it comes back, it tells us where this district is. By the way, it determined that riverfront mixed use, this is actually RFMU. It's a different zoning district. It gives us some idea of design guidelines. Things of like, things that include like regional materials and colors. Buildings should be designed to meet LEED or other energy efficient, sustainable design parameters. There's some things around ground floor transparency. And then of course, parking regulations, right? Parking, very important in Canyon City. It's a small city. They probably don't have a lot of public transport. Things about easements. And then helpfully application requirements, right? Very important. If I'm going to build here, I have to know what my application requirements are going to be. Okay, now I'm going to get really hyper specific. Again, let's pretend that I'm a developer. And in the past, I've run into some issues with screening HVAC equipment. Now, Canyon City has topography. You can see right here to the west, there are some hills. There's also hills to the south. So anything I build, anything that I build around my building is going to be visible from higher elevations. So that's why I'm asking about this screening HVAC. What are the rules around screening HVAC? So what Euclid is going to do is determine, okay, where do I need to find the answer to this question? Of course, it's in the zoning code. And it's going to come back and tell me, first of all, that there are two types. There's a ground wall mounted mechanical unit, and then there is a roof mounted mechanical unit. So it gives me information about both types, and then it gives me some graphics. So I can see here, very nice illustration. Here's what an example screening might look like for an HVAC unit next to a principal building. And then here's the same thing, only a roof with some people in perspective. So again, 4 questions helps me understand what the vision of the city is for comprehensive planning, and all the way down to kind of hyper-specific site requirements for HVAC screening. Okay. Now, let me zoom in over here. As you all probably know, not everybody is, text oriented, right? There's even like a lot of people could make jokes about how a lot of people don't even read anymore. Some people I work with, some people are very map oriented. So with Euclid, you can actually start in the map by just clicking on a parcel. This World's End Brewing Company, we have a little tool in here called Send to EuclidHL. What it's going to do is take this location and send it to Euclid and ask for that zoning information. Ask it to geocode so we can, get some precise kind of locational information about this. So what Euclid will do is, again, it's going to geocode, it's going to find its zoning, but more importantly, it's going to establish that context that those AIs, Euclid, whatever, they love this context, right? They want to know what the subject is going to be. So now that I've said that, I'm going to ask it a very specific question. Can I open a Taco Bell here? Now, again, let me reassure you, Euclid doesn't know, or the zoning code doesn't mention Taco Bell. The comprehensive plan does not mention Taco Bell. But what Euclid can do is determine, using that ability to kind of understand or uncover the semantic meaning of a phrase or a sentence, is that Taco Bell is a restaurant. And then if it's a restaurant, it can consult its zoning code to figure out what are the rules around opening, say, a Taco Bell or a restaurant in a location. So we'll give it another moment here to figure this out. It's going to also do some other interesting things when it does come back with its answer here in just a sec. And this is going to be actually my last question. I'm going to show you one more thing. Oh, here we go. Okay. So Euclid determines that a Taco Bell is a restaurant. And if it's a restaurant, it is most likely a sit-down restaurant. Now, to do that, there are some minimum, there are some requirements, right? Minimum off-street parking, general development standards, permitting. You need to obtain the necessary permits for construction and operation. A site plan review is required. Check out the UDO for the city, and then, of course, sites where it found the information. So think about this. I'm an entrepreneur. It's the weekend. The city's not open. I can, in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, dialogue with the city's kind of governing documents to figure out if I can do this. Finally, it comes back with a graphic. And I like this one because it's very clearly a drive-through, right? Taco Bells are drive-throughs. It shows a parking lot, a nice building, and then, of course, some cars. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up with just kind of answering or trying to pre-answer some questions that we get a lot. Euclid comes with a dashboard. So we hear all the time from clients and prospective clients that they want to know what people are talking about. They want to know what kind of questions. And the reason is always because they're concerned. They know that there are people out there who are going to try to take advantage of this system. So what we do is we give you a dashboard, and what the dashboard does is it exposes, give this a second to render here. It exposes questions that people might be asking the system. Here, let's let that, it's pulling data right now. So let's jump over to the configuration. I mentioned earlier that there are configuration changes that you can make to the system. Those are things like its initial example questions, right? Things like how high can I build at 207 Shallow Ford, or where can I open a new restaurant? Or its introductory text. We allow you to customize that, so you can kind of give it a very nice location-specific view of information. You can also do things like update configurations of logos, right? So some people, me included, I really like to work in a dark theme. It's easier on my eyes. You can enable those kind of things here. Now, the reason why I call that out is that accessibility, things around color blindness, things like that are very important to cities. So we give you the ability to set these themes so you can serve as many citizens as you can possibly reach. Let me do this here. I'll jump over here and call this out. Euclid knows your zoning, right? It has access to your zoning information. We work a lot with Esri software, ArcGIS. We work a lot with a product called ArcGIS Urban. It's a great tool for sort of visualizing development capacities, things like that, managing current planning projects. One thing that is challenging with ArcGIS Urban is to get your zoning information in there. It's very clicky. What you can do from Euclid is you can export the zoning code directly from Euclid into a format that ArcGIS Urban can understand. So what I've done here is I've run this before. Now, if I wanted, I could directly upload this table to ArcGIS Online, and then just begin to work with my zoning types in ArcGIS Urban. So I realize that I'm probably out of time. So what I'm going to do is stop now, give control back to David and Christine. So I look forward to answering some questions, and thank you.
And there are quite a few actually, which I think we could just answer live. Boss has diligently already answered some questions from the panel for his presentation, but I think there's one in particular that stuck out to me that I kind of wanted to answer because I think it's one I've heard and think about a bit. I think one of the items, and Rob, I'd be happy to hear your opinion on this as well. But one of the questions from Jonathan Beckham, many of the items Euclid helps with are tasks that are helpful for junior planners to learn essential skills, become familiar with the zoning development codes, learning to communicate with the public or other stakeholders. I'm curious what the panel thinks about the implications for removing these learning opportunities for new planners. And I guess my response specifically for Euclid and maybe even Rico is that, when we think about how junior planners are learning about the zoning code or learning about learning about how to engage with the public, I would say that there are probably more opportunities to engage the public as part of the plan making process, as part of zoning administration and planning commission meetings. I think there are lots of opportunities that still exist and become more important when we're talking about learning to work with stakeholders in a planning context. That still exists but this to me, at least with Euclid, this is kind of like a re-envisioning of what the front desk looks like for how people get information about what's applicable to them in their community. And I guess I would say that there are probably other opportunities to learn and identify, whenever zoning codes are amended or edited, or there's a planning process that's going on. I would just say, these frontline items might just be reviewed differently. I think you could look at questions, for example, that come to Euclid and see if there's any patterns in what people are asking that suggests maybe, for example, the need for a variance. And then maybe the research that goes into that variance is something the junior planner, sorry, not a variance, but an amendment. Don't want to confuse my zoning parlance. To be clear, I spend most of my day to day doing transportation planning, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm capturing that. But like, is there indicator species that people are looking for amendments based off of the types of chats that they give? I don't know, Rob, do you have anything to add to that junior planner question?
Yeah, thanks, David. We hear a lot, and I didn't bring this up earlier. I feel like I could talk about this for hours. So we hear all the time, um, George or Betsy has been here for 30 years, knows everything about signage, knows everything about parking in the zoning code, and they're retiring in 2 months. How do you replace that institutional knowledge, right? And we think Euclid is the way to do that, because in addition to being able to help citizens, residents, developers, business owners, it is an internal research tool. We have people telling us, yes, they can get questions, and Euclid can find answers to those questions rapidly. I think what you said is it's going to change the front counter, and we think it's going to change it for the better. We think it's going to free up staff time. It's going to let a lot of planners get back to doing things like current planning projects. It's going to take away all those repetitive questions, right? So I was talking about a county south of Seattle. I was speaking to one of the people working at the counter one day, and this young woman was answering basically the same question over and over and over. We want to free up those people because we believe that they want to be spending their day doing the kind of things that they got into planning to do to begin with.
And there are several questions about liability. And I even had a question, like, even if you're trying to restrict a chatbot's access to outside data resources, I could see a situation where a question might be answered based on content within the comprehensive plan versus the zoning code. Like, are those types, because there are a lot of questions about liability if it gives an incorrect answer, for example.
Absolutely.
And there are at least 3 different questions about interpretations and what the legal departments think about Euclid and liability to the municipality. And I was curious, could you talk about what some of your thoughts about that look like?
Yeah, I think there's 2 broad topics here. Is that interpretation is going to happen no matter who answers the question, a person or Euclid. Now, what we do, and this is really the second part of the answer, is that we use a software framework that controls how the AI is going to respond. So we use, in the demo I just gave, we use some models by OpenAI. We have a layer of software on top of that restricts, limits how that response can happen. The AI is used to evaluate the question, and then from there, it goes into a series of actions around retrieving that information. Now, it's going to pull lots of different data sources that it has access to, and then it ranks them. So it literally applies a ranking to each, chunk of information it returns, and it is going to return what, the top ranked things. Now, the other thing it's actually logging that response into that chat log that I showed toward the end. And that's our audit trail. So if a question of liability or, a question of poor interpretation comes up, it is defensible, right? People can go into that chat log, find that response, and evaluate how accurate it is.
Yeah, it is, and I guess like, can you customize Euclid where if that ranking, that internal ranking has more uncertainty, for example, is there a way to tell Euclid, maybe don't answer this question, or wait, or maybe we want to evaluate, because I could see, if there are communities that are more risk adverse, to incorrect responses, if that ranking was exposed in a way where people could say possibly hold off on answering this question, or say, this question is complex enough, I want to have you reach out to our planning department at X. Does that make sense? Like, is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. In what we saw today, your control over its, let's just say, creativity and responses, right? It's sort of uh, more or less what they call deterministic, is configurable. Again, I don't want to go too deep into it. For one, it's a little nerdy and low level. But if you are working with a large language model, you probably know what I'm talking about. Those kind of, we'll call them dials, are adjustable. So in other words, you can say, by the way, we ship it at its most deterministic, strictest interpretations. So it's not going to wander. And even wander is the wrong word. It's going to be less creative in its responses. So those are dials you can definitely turn. Now, in forthcoming releases, we are going to give you the ability to have more control over actual specific, let's just say, conversation types, right? So we can work with the LLM to say, yeah, perhaps, we do not want to answer questions about this topic in this area. So what we are doing, and this is honestly thrilling, is we are working with a large language model in a geographic sense. So it's not only about your planning and zoning, but and since planning and zoning are themselves heavily influenced by geography, Euclid itself is working at a very low level with geography and these documents because, again, they're so heavily connected.
Well, there's one question I think applies to both of you that I think I just want to try and bring it back a little bit, kind of, which I think is an important one. What types, like, are these for both Rico and Euclid? Are these subscription based or one-time purchases? And then another question. Let's answer that one real quick. And I think they're both subscription based, right? Is that the case?
Go ahead, Foss.
Yeah, so Rico is based on like a decision per project. So it's a subscription, but it's based on the number of projects you're processing through the application process.
Got it. So it's entirely, so the more you use it, the more you pay.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so Euclid is also an annual subscription. There's a setup step as well. But yeah, after the system is up and running, it's a subscription, an annual subscription.
And I think another question that applies to both of you that I think is worth grounding is kind of what infrastructure is needed for either of these assistance applications. What's the cost and impact of the infrastructure? And there was another question about cost of implementing Euclid. So I think that one would be good. Voss, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So I mean, we've learned basically to work with any level of infrastructure a municipality or a council in New Zealand might have, like whether they're plans in PDFs or HTML. We've just learned to work around it. The GIS system's typically pretty easy to integrate into. So I mean, overall, for us to load a plan or a code, it's a matter of like days to a week to kind of do now. So it does have a manual labor component, but it's not a huge thing. and connecting to the GIS is a small job, like it's within the same week. We do charge like an implementation fee with Rico to cover that, but it typically only works out to be kind of 15-20% of what it would cost for a year's subscription.
Okay. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? I was answering a different question on that.
No, it's good. I figured. I appreciate that. We're trying to get through everybody's questions in 3 minutes. I think one of the questions is like what infrastructure is involved, and the cost of implementing Euclid. So I know you mentioned there's some pulling of information from ArcGIS Online. There's pulling of information from documents. How important is the ArcGIS Online or not ArcGIS? Sorry. ArcGIS feature services or map services, for example. I guess, is that dependent infrastructure? Is there an underlying assumption that there'll be some connection to a GIS or sets of GIS layers for Euclid to operate?
I mean, I would say it's very important. It gives another dimension of answers. It helps people understand where these things can occur or happening. It is Euclid knows how to query ArcGIS Online. So if your city has an ArcGIS Online organization, it's really just a connection. It can reach in, look for maps, look for GIS data, look for documents that have been shared up there. By the way, if you have ArcGIS Enterprise, we know people are also running ArcGIS Enterprise. It works with Enterprise as well. So yeah, infrastructure needs for Euclid are ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. And then basically we host the application in Amazon, and then we have some other cloud databases that we use.
Cool. Well, I know we are approaching time. I think we have. Do you have time for one more question, Christine, or do you want to close us out?
I'm okay with one more.
All right, let's do one more. And hopefully we can try and follow up with some of these questions later. One of the questions was, will EI reassure the users that they can ask questions without being paddled? I'm kind of curious, like if they're asking, I guess like I think based off the inspection of because you can inspect specific chats, do you retain any other PII information about the question asker? I think the answer would be no, but technically they would be asking with their address. I mean, they would be giving some PII information, I guess, in the process if you're reviewing the chat. I guess that information would be available to the planner once they use the platform, right?
Yeah, we're not collecting IP addresses or anything else from the browser. That said, we are logging the chats, right? So if
Right.
you get in there and say something very inappropriate, we know. And do we log the geographies if someone types in an address? Absolutely. And the reason why we're doing that is well, for one, it's input, but then also we want to give the cities, I would call it advanced information. Like what we've noticed, especially in Canyon City, there are clusters of questions in certain neighborhoods. There are people there who share common concerns. One of our firm founders characterizes it as it's a great way to understand where the zoning code may not be working. So we want to help the cities understand where they may have flashpoints or future problems, or where people are concerned about things. Give them advance notice. But yeah, just to reiterate, and I understand, I get it. We're not collecting IPs. We're not snooping on people's browser histories or cookies or anything like that. That's just not who we are.
No, that makes sense. I mean, for the information it seems like some of the information you collect merely the information that's used to answer the question. something.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Well said.
But I do think though, like just the nature of those questions, you know, I don't know if I would ask about my illegal chicken coop to Euclid, to answer the question that was asked. But I think that's for another day. Well, I wanted to say to both of our presenters, thank you both for sharing and answering these questions. And to everybody who attended, I hope this was useful. And the technology division is very happy to provide opportunities to engage with innovators in the space such as these. So thank you both for coming. And until next time.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.